Welcome to the Startup Visa Podcast. I am your host, Tahmina Watson. I am an immigration attorney at Watson Immigration Law and the author of the book, The Startup Visa. This podcast is a spin-off from the book. Here, we will discuss tips and strategies to make immigration cases successful for founders, entrepreneurs, investors, and business owners. Thanks for tuning in to the Startup Visa Podcast. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is another episode with Tahmina Watson. This particular episode will actually air on both of our podcasts, the Startup Visa podcast, as well as the Tahmina Talks Immigration podcast. So if you're a regular listener, you'll know that we have two different podcasts in which we talk about, specific immigration issues. But this one is a very important one that many people will be interested in. And this is all about EB5 visas, the EB5 program, and how it can be useful to you and your family, particularly if you have children who will age out, or if you think your visa might be in jeopardy in some way or another. And today we have an incredible guest. He is a good friend and he is an expert on EB5s. His name is Jordan Lawrence. Jordan is the EB5AN Director of Business Development. In this role, he structures EB5 project offerings and develops new strategic relationships. Jordan most recently served as the Director of Operations at Houston EB5. He has over 5 years of experience in the real estate finance and development industries, online marketing, and international business development. You can learn more about him on the website, and the link will be posted in the show notes. Jordan, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure, Tamina. Thank you for having me and for that kind introduction.
Oh, well, of course. I am so honored that I get to speak with you. And we've done this before and we've spoken, in different formats. But what is so important to me at this moment is that your expertise is actually going to help a lot of people when there is so much uncertainty in the world of immigration. We're in the second week of a new administration that has started with a lot of noise in the immigration world, with lots of executive orders. And of course, the executive orders are not limited to immigration. They started with immigration, but they're actually all over the place. And even if there are executive orders that don't necessarily directly say immigration, there are indirect impacts, such as if there are if there's a federal hiring freeze, or if they are going to be letting go of federal workers. A lot of them work for USCIS and the Department of Homeland Security. So there will be impacts up and down the chain, no matter which executive order is in play. But they will have an impact on the work that Jordan does and I do, and a lot of the reasons that you're tuning in. So Jordan, welcome. Tell us where you are at the moment and, how your day has been going so far.
Sure. Well, based here in Houston, Texas, it's where I was born and raised. So just doing this podcast from the comforts of my home today. But yeah, we've been pretty busy in terms of the projects that we're currently raising for. I've had a ton of investors get in since the RIA was passed in 2022. So due to a lot of the new advantages like priority processing, set aside visas, as well as something that I'm sure we'll discuss today, concurrently filing an adjustment status and all the benefits that come with that, EB5 has been as busy as ever. There's a ton of demand, a lot of applicants going through, and especially given the upcoming backlog that we'll be facing Chinese and Indian applicants, there's not a lot of time for rest right now. So you're finding me in the midst of a very hectic, but a good time. So it's always good to be busy.
Well, I'm very grateful you're making some time for us. So let's go back to basics a little bit. For a lot of people who are listening, they may be familiar with the EB5, but there might be people outside the country who are wondering what this is. Can you explain briefly what the EB5 program is?
Happy to. So the EB5 program was started back in 1990 as a direct way for business owners to get a green card through making a qualified investment. Then a few years later, the popular route of a regional center investment was enacted. And what that allows is for foreign investors to first get a conditional green card for 2 years, and then it later converts to a permanent green card after they have made a qualifying investment and provided evidence that at least 10 jobs were created with their capital. So for US citizens like you and me, it's a non-taxpayer stimulus to local economies, creates jobs, and it helps attract dollars here to the US, and it gives a quicker path than a lot of immigration options to these foreign investors. And the ranges of reasons why people do it. Some people are looking for, a safer place to park assets. Other people want their children to go to universities, be educated here in the U.S. And I would say probably 60 to 70% of applicants today are workers on H-1Bs, specifically Indians and Chinese who are facing decades long. Some projections are even as bad as 100, 150 years to get a green card through their employment-based petition. So a lot of those workers and are then hedging with EB5 to get a green card in a much more predictable timeline, maybe 1.5, 2.5 years if they're going into rural. I would say maybe 2, 3 years if they're going into urban or high unemployment projects. So a lot of different reasons, but it is in the realm of complex US immigration, it's a pretty straightforward program.
And the amounts that people invest are either 800,000 if it's in a rural, targeted employment area.
Mhm.
I typically call it poor area so people can understand me. But also it's $1,050,000 if they're investing anywhere else. And that one particular investment will allow an entire family, as long as their children are under 21, to get green cards. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So then let's move on to say, how do you help people with their goals?
Sure. So I'm with EB5AN, which is a regional center that covers the entire 48 continental US states. So we're able to sponsor projects and allow for applicants to invest as limited partners. And then that pooled EB5 capital is either loaned to or invested as equity into typically real estate projects. That's what we specialize in. You can have operational businesses as well, but there comes increased risk with that, not as dependent job creation. So we like to stick to our bread and butter and what we know best, which is usually ground up real estate developments.
Mm-hmm. And with the new administration coming into office, and you just mentioned about backlogs, what kind of restrictions are you expecting in the near future? You mentioned backlogs, that's just a visa bulletin issue. So
Mhm.
let's talk about that for a moment, and then maybe handle what you expect with visa restrictions, adjudications that will, turn people towards EB5s. What are you expecting?
Sure. Well, that's the hot topic for the past few months. Well, at least since November, November 7th or whatever it was. But first about backlogs. So essentially, when there's too much demand and not enough supply of visas, a country could run into a situation where even though you're applying today, the dates will retrogress at some point in the future, and then you'll have to wait for your priority date to become current. That's what we call retrogression and having a backlog occur. And on January's visa bulletin, so in the middle of December when it was released, the USCIS warned that a retrogression or backlog is coming for the EB5 category. Now, in their typical fashion, they didn't say which countries, they didn't say when it would happen, or even which project categories, because there's, as you mentioned, unreserved, which is $1,050,000 investment, typically in more affluent areas. Then you have infrastructure projects, which you don't really see a lot of when it qualifies for set aside visas. And then you have high unemployment slash urban, which you did mention are typically more distressed areas, higher unemployment. And then you have rural areas, which is right now the most demanded for a variety of reasons. But going back to what I was saying, the USCIS didn't give explicit guidance on the upcoming backlog. But if you just look at filing data, you do the math, China and India will retrogress, and it will likely be for urban first, because up until a few months ago, that had been the most demanded EB5 category. And then it will likely follow for rural, but they both could happen at the same time. Now, when is that going to happen? It's the million dollar question. Based upon precedent, whenever a retrogression had been warned of on a bulletin, it had been about 3 months thereafter that it actually hit that bulletin. So that would put us at about April 2025. Um, it could happen as soon as the March bulletin, which is released in February. But I think we do still have a little bit of time. And the biggest impact that this has, and this is the biggest takeaway that people should have from listening to this point, is whenever it does retrogress, if you're not able to file by that point, so meaning, let's say April bulletin, when it's released in March, there's a priority date listed. If you can't apply before the end of March, you won't be able to concurrently file the adjustment of status, which is a huge step in advantage because the 485, the adjustment of status, it provides EAD and AP, so work and travel authorization in about 4 to 5 months. It also immediately locks in the residency and protects the investor. So obviously, a lot of these applicants are H-1Bs. God forbid, if they were laid off from their job, they wouldn't have to find another sponsor within 60 days or leave the US. They could, quite frankly, do nothing, kick their feet up and pursue some hobbies, paint. But obviously, they're probably going to want to work and earn some income. And then it also freezes children's age, so it prevents them from aging out, which is crucial for applicants with kids who are nearing the age of 21. So the concurrent filing, it's huge because it provides those green card benefits before actually getting the green card. So if people are looking to take advantage of that, they need to know timing is of the essence, because again, when a priority date's listed, they're not going to be able to do that anymore. And they would need to wait until their petition's approved and there's a visa available before they could file the 485. With rural, that's looking like maybe 1.25 to 2 years down the road. With urban, for India and China, it could be 5 years, could be even more than that. It's difficult to say at this point in time. So that's the situation regarding a backlog and retrogression. Um, I think if investors from China or India are looking to get the green card as quickly as possible, there's no doubt about it. Rural is the best option as it does have priority processing. We're averaging about 9 to 12 months for the approvals. Now, for an applicant today, they are going to be backlogged. So it's not going to be getting a green card in 9 to 12 months. It might be a year and a half, 2.5 years, maybe stretch that out a little more depending on how far out they apply. And then urban is going to be significantly longer. But again, those delays are, you know, um, yeah, the delays in processing, it's a bit mitigated if you can concurrently file because you get those benefits much sooner. So that's kind of where all the rush from applicants are coming from right now, and why we're all so busy in the industry. And then to your point about President Trump coming in and the new administration, I don't think you're going to see anything about the program change. He's familiar with EB5. He's used it. His son-in-law's used it. It's a in the grand scheme of the US, it's one of the few bipartisan things that actually gets passed. So I don't think anything about EB5 in general will change, but you'll probably start to see tougher pushbacks on certain source of funds practices, which might not have a leg to stand on, and recent trends. And also you might see increased processing time. So I think those are the two biggest risks facing us with the upcoming administration.
Thank you for that very detailed explanation. I'm sitting here listening to you, and I say this to a lot of my clients, but I feel as though I need to channel my inner Eckhart Tolle about the power of now, because if you don't start now, by the time you pay attention, it might be too late. And so the power of now has become a mantra at my office to all the things that I advocate for my clients. And finding the project and going through the paperwork, there's a lot of time that is necessary to even get to the filing point. So I appreciate all of those warnings, as well as predictions and explanation. Question for you is, you said pushback on EB5 source of funds and the length of time that will happen, but I think there could be pushback in H-1Bs and other types of work visas. And you may remember this, that from the first time President Trump was in office, H-1Bs had a lot of scrutiny, to the point that people who'd been on H-1Bs for over a decade had faced denials. And that pushed a lot of H-1B visa holders into the world of EB5s. And I think that could happen too. So if anybody's listening and they are on a work visa that is valid for maybe the next 2 years, or might even need to be renewed next year, I think if you're one of those people, you should possibly look into this program and contact Jordan about, what's out there and timelines, and take note of the guidance that he's given. If there's a backlog coming on EB5, the backlogs already exist in the EB2 and EB3 and even EB1. And so it's which backlog is, which is the lesser of the evils, so to speak. And so how long, in your opinion, does it take to find a project? Let's start with that. So take us through the steps a client will have. So, somebody talks to me and I say, go speak to Jordan. What happens from there?
Sure. Well, each case is so individualistic. People have different timing needs. Sometimes it can be rushed. Other times I speak with people and they might not end up doing EB5 for a year or two down the road. So, excluding the outliers in general, someone would contact us, and then they would speak to us about our projects, their situation, make sure that they have a very good understanding of the program in general, the timelines, the steps, how to have success, etc. And then we really start to peel back the onion and see what's important to them. What are their priorities? Now, everyone's doing this for the immigration benefit. They're obviously not doing it for the investment. Otherwise, they wouldn't be placing their capital in EB5 just because it's not a high ROI vehicle. But with that being said, there can be certain structures like debt versus equity that uh, allow for higher returning than others, the security of the capital. And obviously, everyone wants to get their money back. And we've had a great track record with that and haven't ever lost a dollar of EB5 capital. Um, but there is certain provisions or structures that you could have an investment to maximize that security. And in exchange for that, they might not get as high of an ROI, but if they're willing to take that increased risk, they might get a higher ROI. So we try to really learn about what the investor wants, what their priorities are when speaking to them, and we'll walk them through our projects. And then it's really just going back and forth, making sure they understand the structure, they're comfortable with the development, they have confidence in it. And then I would say, again, it's so different for every investor, but usually within a month or a few months, if they're pretty serious, they will then engage an attorney. And that's always the most important step, because without the attorney, you're not documenting the source of funds. And in order to take a step back, to have success in EB5 for the conditional green card or the 526E, the source of funds needs to be clean. So you need to be showing where every single dollar came from and that it was legally earned. And you have the backup and documentation to support it. And that's what you, the immigration attorney, specialize in and are experts at. So always recommend speaking with an attorney, consult them, engage them as quickly as possible, because the power of now, if something happens next month, at least you have the source of funds done. You can make a project decision quickly. And then also, in addition to the source of funds, the project has to have what's called the 956F approval. So, the investor will engage an attorney, start documenting the funds. Depending on how complex the sources are, maybe it takes a few weeks, maybe a month, a few months. And again, that's why the power of now is so important, because it can take time to build up these cases. And then they sign the project documentation, subscribe, wire the capital when given the green light, pay the fees, and then ultimately submit the petition. So it can range. I've seen cases be put together from the moment I've spoken with an investor to 2, 3 weeks later. Now, I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't say that's every single case, but then cases can take a few months. I would, on average, say maybe 1 to 3 months or so.
You know, a lot of people are probably in the wait and see mode.
Mhm.
What kind of guidance would you give them?
Well, a uh, a very wise person once told me, if you're waiting for the government to issue advice and then reacting to it, you're going to be late to the game. And that's why it's always so important to just speak with an attorney. And if you have the capability to do EB5 and you're pretty serious about it, engage the attorney. Start documenting the funds, because let's say in February, when the March Visa Bulletin is released, there's a priority date, and investors then have 10, 20 days to concurrently file. Well, at least you've gotten that legwork out of the way, as opposed to then scrambling to engage an attorney. By that point in time, there's a rush of applicants. You're probably not going to be able to get in with the attorney that you preferred. And then you're really just living on a hope and a prayer that you're able to document your source of funds. So it's a riskier petition. You're rushing to subscribe. And honestly, you're probably rushing to select a project, which isn't necessarily the best financial decision, because you're not getting to understand the collateral securing the loan, the structure, the plans for repayment, the likelihood of that. And, you know, I think whenever in general, whenever in life we try to rush things in, you're going to end up creating some problems for yourself down the road. So it's always good to, if you have the time, take your time, or at least be doing things in anticipation instead of just reacting.
Very good advice. We're running out of time very soon, but I want you to maybe just touch on the four categories of EB5s at the moment. When the law changed in 2022, it restructured the EB5 program into creating the rural track and these other tracks. Are you just able to give us a quick breakdown of what they are and typically how much money people need to spend on those?
Sure, sure. So the RIA added, well, let's take a step back. It stands for Reform and Integrity Act. And I'm sure that anyone listening to this who's heard of EB5 probably knew that there needed to be some reform measures passed, because there has been fraud in the program. There have been investors who have gotten the royal end of the stick, to use a colloquial term. And that's part of why Congress let the program lapse and then reauthorized it after it had these measures. So there's a bunch of things to discuss, but first and foremost, there's the requirement that regional centers either undergo annual audits or have third-party fund administrators. So that ensures that the money that's being raised and then loaned or invested into projects, it's not just vanishing into thin air. The ability to, for a developer to really take the bag of money and run has been pretty much eliminated from the program. Um, so there's investor protection measures. There's also integrity fee payments, and the USCIS conducting audits on regional centers, doing site visits to make sure everything's above board. And then when you boil down to the investor level, you have different categories of projects. I already mentioned there's unreserved, infrastructure, high unemployment, or urban, as it's also referred to, and then rural. And there's also goals for processing time. So rural has a 120-day goal for processing of the 526E. Urban has 240. Now, those timelines aren't being met. Rural more so, but again, with the applicants already in the queue and the pipeline USCIS has, we're averaging about 9 to 12 months for our 526E approvals, which is much better than previous years in pre-2022 days where it's taken 3, 4, maybe 5 years. So processing times have decreased. And then you also have what's called the set aside visa categories. So if there are investors from high volume countries, there's the opportunity that maybe some unused, unreserved visas are then distributed to those higher volume countries in the reserved categories. But every single year, we know that X amount of visas are available to these project categories, and then we're recapturing the unused ones from other categories. So, we could really get into the weeds about a lot of different measures of the RIA, but I think to get it down to a granular level, processing times have decreased, which is great. You have new investor protections and integrity measures, which again can't guarantee repayment. And people probably know that about EB5. This is an equity at risk program, although there are riskier projects than others. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to go in 100% risk, but just some level. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of new protections, decreased times, set aside visas, new project categories, investment amounts changed. And we're set for reauthorization here in about 2 years and 9 months. So as long as investors get in before September 26th, they're grandfathered in for processing, which is great. But I think we have at least another few years of EB5 and a good path forward. So excited and looking forward to it.
Well, thank you for that breakdown. That's really helpful. Are there obviously is a lot of demand at the moment, and you mentioned a lot of demand for the rural projects, and I could see that demand growing. Are there enough rural projects out there that you are aware of?
There are a lot, not as many as urban or high unemployment projects. And to be honest, we evaluate hundreds of projects a year. At any given time, we might have, I would say, 4 or 5 different opportunities available, and it's very difficult to find a good rural project with an experienced developer where their jobs are already created, it's under construction, fully financed. Those are the type of deals we like to place investors in because there's a lot of risk that has been taken off the table, immigration risk as well as investment risk. And it's not easy. It's not easy to find a rural project. So not as many spaces in the market as urban. And then part of what's caused such a big backlog pending for urban as opposed to rural is the urban category has half the amount of visas set aside every year as rural does. Part of Senators Leahy and Grassley, their efforts in passing the Reform and Integrity Act, and they're Democrat and Republican respectively, that both come from rural states. They wanted to incentivize development in states like theirs in rural areas. So that's why rural projects got the higher number of visas and also priority processing. But a lot of investors have been, lack of a better term, conditioned to urban projects. That's really all that was available pre-2022. And investors have a belief that rural is riskier than urban. And in some cases, that is true. But what really determines risk is obviously a project's likelihood of success, but even more importantly, the collateral securing the loan, the EB5 loan, that is. So if you have enough collateral where it far exceeds the value of the loan itself, and maybe the value of that collateral isn't directly tied to the project, well, then you have some liquidity and assets to go after depending on or regardless of whether the rural project succeeds or not. And then there's plenty of highly demanded rural areas. We all think of ski towns, mountain towns, and know how expensive and hotly visited they are. So I think these are some things that aren't really present in other countries. Maybe they don't have as big of a ski culture or mountain town demand And sometimes most of the time, rural areas in those countries are very distressed. There's not a lot of people wanting to go there. So it makes sense why, until recently, you didn't see a lot of rural demand. But now that the cat's out of the bag with regards to the processing time for urban to get a green card, and investors learning that you can have good rural deals, it's just not every rural deal is a good deal. And you have maybe 10, 20 times the amount of deals in urban. I think things are starting to shift, and we see a lot more rural investors now.
That's fantastic. And I think I go back to the power of now. It's the early bird gets the worm kind of thing. Let's make sure people go to you, get their answers, and hopefully find projects that are, controlled by experienced EB5 developers that can protect the client's interest in every which way. So thank you so much, Jordan. I could talk to you all day. I have so many other questions. We might have to do a part 2 at some point. But for today's purposes, let's just make sure people know how to contact you. How can they connect with you?
Sure. They could reach out through email, reachable at Jordan, JORDAN, period, Lawrence, LAWRENCE, at EB5AN, Echo Bravo 5 affiliate network.com. They could also go on to our website, eb5visainvestments.com, and fill out a contact us form or book a call with us. Reachable on WhatsApp and cell. So anyone wants to contact me, you could always reach me 713-494-6313. Now, if I start getting 1,000 calls, might have to change my number, but no, just joking. As long as no no one's calling at 3:30 in the morning and upsetting my wife, we should be fine. Yeah, and then any other, I think that's the only ways I'm reachable. They can send a pigeon in a letter, but it might not get to me.
Yeah, they might get the owl from Harry Potter. But am I right that you might be coming to Seattle at some point in the near future?
Yes, ma'am. I'll be there on the 13th and going to be hosting a dinner, an FAQ dinner with you and a few other immigration attorneys, and really just giving investors the unbridled access to ask as many questions as they want. It's not promotional of us at EB5AN or our projects. And I guess just to sum up a point about us, we just want to be a resource for information and give you a very transparent view into the process. And as long as we're doing that and helping point you in the right direction, I think we're doing our job. So that's the intent of the FAQ dinner. We've been having them across the US, really good turnout. Typically, there's not a single attendee who doesn't speak up and ask questions, and I think it's very rewarding and interactive. So if you're in the Seattle region and you want to attend the dinner, please reach out. You can also RSVP online, or if you just want to schedule a time to meet one-on-one with me, get some coffee, I'd be more than happy to do that too.
And that is February 13th, 2025 in the evening somewhere in Seattle. And they can get the detail if they register.
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. Well, Jordan, it is such a pleasure and honor to speak with you. Thank you for doing all the work you do with so much integrity, which is such an important word for the EB5 universe, and for helping our clients and just making sure the right information is out there. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on again, Tamina. Always nice chatting with you, and look forward to great things to come. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the Startup Visa podcast. Please rate us on iTunes or anywhere else you listen to your podcasts. We would so appreciate it. Please also check us out at watsonimmigrationlaw.com for all your startup and business immigration needs. Thank you so much.